Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session. Let us give a few more minutes to the registrants to join the session. We can see that the numbers are constantly increasing. So we'll begin the session in the next 3 or 4 minutes. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second module of our workshop From Funding to Communicating Science. I hope you all can hear me. So today we have gathered to delve into the intricacies of grant writing. I'm Madhankumar, the head of marketing for open research at Taylor & Francis Group. Joining me today are our distinguished speaker, Dr. Madhankumar Anandhakrishnan, and the co-organizer of this workshop, Dr. Karishma Kaushik, Executive Director of India Bioscience. Now, for those who missed our first session yesterday, this virtual workshop is a collaborative effort between India Bioscience and Taylor & Francis. Our aim is to synergize our strengths and contribute to the research community in India. So we've meticulously curated topics that hold utmost significance in the career journeys of researchers, especially early career researchers who make most of the audience today. The sessions are designed to make a meaningful impact and provide valuable insights to you. And we really hope that you enjoy these sessions as much as we are enjoying, conducting them. So in the next 2 hours or so, our speaker, Madan, will cover insights, strategies, and actionable tips that you can apply immediately to your grant writing journey. So whether you are a senior researcher, faculty member, looking to enhance your skills, or somebody new to grant writing, I'm sure there's something valuable for each one of you. Our speaker, Madan, received his PhD in structural biology from the European Molecular Biology Lab and the University of Heidelberg, Germany. In 2013, he joined DBT Wellcome Trust India Alliance as a grants advisor. Now, besides grant advising and co-leading the Alliance's SciComm training workshops, he contributed to the pilot phase of IRMI, which is the Indian Research Management Initiative, an endeavor aimed at strengthening the country's research management ecosystem. In mid-2019, he was appointed as a grants manager and was responsible for an entire portfolio of fellowship applications and awards. Early last year, he moved to a grant managerial role at the Center for Brain Research, IISc Bangalore, where he takes care of research management, liaison, and communication portfolios. So before we begin our journey, I want to encourage active participation in this workshop. Feel free to ask questions using our chat feature, and we'll have a dedicated Q&A session as well as an interactive activity towards the end of the session. Also, our speaker will be stopping at various points during his presentation, and feel free to put forward his questions to you. Now, your input is not only welcome, it's also crucial in making this workshop a dynamic and enriching experience for all. So without further ado, let's embark on this learning adventure together. Over to you, Madan.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Madhuriba. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. Let me begin by expressing gratitude to teams India Bioscience, Taylor and Francis for this excellent initiative. I think there is a lot of thirst for such workshops in the Indian biomedical research community, and I think the workshop is addressing exactly a very precise and significant gaping need. So yesterday, I think you all had a very informative session on manuscript writing, and today we will talk about an equally, if not more, challenging form of science communication, writing grants. So what we will do today is a superficial dive into various aspects of grant writing. We will not go into the details of different fellowships and grants that might be available for early career researchers, but we'll talk about where to find opportunities. What we will be focusing mostly on is how to do the writing itself. How do you compose various parts of your grant proposal together? How do you conceive them together to put together a competitive grant application? So I'll just start sharing my slides. I hope they are visible to you in the full screen mode. All right. So I did mention that grant writing is a challenging form of science communication. Why is that? It's because it requires a very special set of skills to be able to secure peer-reviewed research funding through the process of grant writing. Scientists have brilliant ideas. They are brilliant communicators in general, but the process of grant writing itself requires a special set of skills, which not all scientists get it naturally. So I would say grantsmanship is an acquired set of skills necessary to secure peer-reviewed research funding for yourself. I like this cartoon where somebody thinks that they're good at understanding numbers. The stock market is full of numbers, so naturally they would expect that they'd make a lot of money, but oh, where did the money go? So it is more than the knowledge of numbers itself. It is about a set of skills to be able to navigate the various intricacies of the stock market. Similarly, grantsmanship also involves a set of very special skills. So why is grants writing so challenging? It's primarily because you have to cater, or the grant writer has to cater to a diverse group of people that you will have to convince that your idea is worth investing in, right? So this diverse set of readers of your grant will have to be thoroughly convinced that your idea is worth investing in, and so that's why your grant writing requires a lot of time and effort. So what are reviewers of grants typically looking for? The first item on the list is probably significance of the proposed work. The work has to add value to what is already known in the field, and it has to take the field even further beyond the boundaries of knowledge. Reviewers are also looking at the competitiveness of the applicant or the applicant team itself. So the grant, besides proposing the research idea, must also convey or demonstrate that the team or the applicant themselves are competitive to carry out whatever is being proposed in the grant. Reviewers are also looking for innovation and feasibility of the proposal. Basically, reviewers do not like to see a rehash of what is already done or what is already known. They would like applicants to push the boundaries of knowledge by introducing technical innovation or scientific innovation through their research grants. And because there is tough competition and the resources available are quite limited, it is only natural that reviewers are looking for something new, something innovative, something creative. At the same time, the proposal has also to be feasible. It has to be doable within the boundaries of the grant in terms of the time available, the resources available, and the human resource available. Let's say there is an innovative research question that's being pursued, and the end goals are quite clearly articulated. What matters, what is equally important is also the approach that will be taken to achieve the proposed goals. The methodology that the authors are proposing will have to be scientifically sound, rigorous, and should stand the scrutiny of peer review. The environment or the institutional support that is available for the grantees to be able to take forward the work is also an important factor. It has to be a conducive research environment which provides all the infrastructure, which provides all the basic amenities required to initiate the work and take it off the ground. So more often than not, reviewers also look at this aspect of the grant proposal quite carefully. Last, but definitely not the least, reviewers are also very worried or very concerned about ethical considerations. They want to be absolutely sure that whatever they're recommending for funding is not going to hurt animals, it's not going to hurt humans, it's not breaching any code of conduct. So if these 6 major points and everything associated with these major points are taken care of, reviewers would really like to fund the proposal and see it flourish. So contrary to popular opinion, funding committees really want to see proposed research in the best shape as possible, and they would like to see it creating an impact in the field. So I think it's a cliched statement, but it does take time and a complete team to win grants. What many researchers tend to do is that they start thinking about their grant application 1 week prior to the deadline, and they're actually typing away madly at the keyboard 24 hours before the deadline. But these are proposals that typically don't fly very high. The proposals that do very well are the ones that have been conceived and nurtured and developed over significant periods of time. The development process of a protocol or a proposal should ideally be stretched over many months so that all considerations of different aspects of the proposal are given due importance. So I said that there has to be a lot of preparation, there has to be a lot of time and patience devoted to conceiving a research proposal. What are the preparatory steps? One has to think about what is the science. One has to think about what the funding agency is and do a little bit of homework about the funding agency itself. And also be mindful of the timeline and the competition involved to be absolutely sure that this is in line with what the researcher can afford and what the researcher is expected to deliver. Right? So talking a little bit about preparing for the science. Preparing for the science involves, perfect conception of the idea itself, for which a clear view of what the big picture is absolutely important. What is the big picture? What is known in the field? How has the field evolved and reached this particular stage? And what else is needed to take the field further? What is the small picture? At the backdrop of the big picture and what is known in the field, what are the specific narrow set of questions that you would like to address during, through this grant? What are the questions that are open in the field and what can potentially be addressed through the grant? There is a clear distinction because when we're talking about feasibility, it's not possible to write a grant that aspires to address all the open research questions in the field. So a clear view of the small picture is as important as the big picture itself. One must also think about co-investigators. If it is not an individual-driven fellowship, if it is a grant and a team is allowed on the grant, one might as well think of assembling a team of co-investigators who would help various aspects of the research. Now that the world is moving towards multidisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity, there is always strong encouragement to bring on board a strong team of co-investigators who, with complementary skill sets and expertise, will be able to address different parts of the research question and weave a compelling story together. Many grants also allow you to add collaborators. Now, how are collaborators different from co-investigators? Co-investigators are normally someone who has a major contribution to the research proposal, and they are going to be shouldering responsibilities quite regularly, quite strongly with you as the lead applicant. Collaborators are someone who can have an on and off association with the project. It might be somebody who is lending technical knowledge, who is lending intellectual input, who is lending materials, consumables, or some reagents for your research, but they are a significant clog of the research themselves. So some schemes allow you to have as many co-investigators as possible. Some might allow you to have just one co-investigator from your own department. So depending on the requirements of the scheme, you will have to make these choices very clearly and commensurate with what the requirements of the project are. And part of preparing for the science is also thought into what is the research environment. Is the institution that you're currently located at fully equipped to help you with addressing the research questions that you're throwing out? Or would you need an overseas visit, or would you need collaborators from abroad or in India who would, with their, besides the research expertise, also contribute to an environment where your experiments can be performed? So all these points will have to be clearly thought out while you're trying to start framing your research question and your research proposal. Let's say you have a brilliant idea and you have a wonderful team that's going to help you carry out the idea, put it down on paper, and to take it off the ground. You will have to think about who's going to be funding your idea, right? There are several opportunities available out there, government sources of funding, private sources of funding, philanthropic funding, corporate social responsibility, and so on. But similar to what we discussed at the Manuscript module yesterday, I think the key is to find the match, and the work that you propose should be within the scope of funding agency itself. So it is worthwhile to research the funding agency, several options available out there, and get a clear idea of whether your proposal falls within the remit or the funding scope of the agency. The agency will have to be absolutely invested in the kind of work that you're proposing. Now, there might be some schemes which are very, very broad. They might say that we will fund any research that is relevant to human welfare, human well-being. Now, almost all of biomedical research comes under this umbrella, right? So it could be such a very vast canvas, or it could be something very narrow and focused where they say, we will support technology development in the field of nanotechnology, particularly in the context of cancer biology, right? It can be as broad as the first example, or as very clear and precise as in the second example. So one will have to make a careful judgment of where your proposal will be able to fly high, before the actual submission process. Agencies typically clearly articulate what the requirements for a funded project are in terms of competitiveness of the proposal, in terms of a budget that might accompany the proposal, in terms of the competitiveness of the team, or other administrative requirements. So while researching the funding agency and the scheme, one has to be fully aware of what the typical requirements for a funded project are. One way to be sure about this is, of course, researching the funding agency, but also talking to investigators who have been successful in the past in securing that particular source of funding, and see if what you're able to offer as deliverables would match with what could be perceived as requirements for a funded project by that particular scheme. And it's always advisable to contact the funder's staff, the program staff early if you have any questions about the suitability of your candidature, the suitability of your proposal. Now, while this is encouraged and appreciated, one must also bear in mind that funders receive hundreds and thousands of queries like this every week. So if they are going to ask them questions about something that is obviously available on their website or in their publicity material, you probably will not receive an answer. So if you would like to actually elicit a response from the program staff, my suggestion would be is to first do a thorough check of the information available on their website and their publicity material. If you're still not clear about what you want to ask, then phrase your question in a very clear way and say, I know from the website that such and such stipulations exist, but it still does not answer my question, which is as follows. And then you present the question, you're more likely to elicit a response from the program staff. Now, how does one identify funding agencies? As somebody who is probably looking at who's probably in the final year of your PhD and looking at postdoc options, or you're a young investigator who is setting out to write your first grant, you might not be aware of what different funding options are, because there are so many, there are only a handful of them which actually grab the attention of the majority of life science researchers. There are also others which are slowly emerging and slowly gaining importance. So one suggestion here would be is to look at publications in your field and look at the funding statement and see where similar other projects have been funded, by whom, and where these have been actually awarded. So this might give you an indication of possible sources of support who might likely be interested in the kind of work that you are proposing. There are also other portals available online. I think the best example is, or the forerunner here is India Bioscience, which has numerous collations of funding opportunities available for young researchers in India, be it fellowships, be it national or international grants, be it travel grants. I think they have an excellent resource of all the opportunities available for young life science researchers in India. They also have on social media what they call Science Jobs Tuesday, where they make an elaborate announcement of jobs available, science jobs available around the country, across the country. This includes not just grants and fellowships, but also postdoc positions, faculty positions, research assistant positions, industry jobs, and so on. So I think if you've not looked at India Biosciences resources, I would strongly urge you to do so. Now, let's say you're convinced or you're prepared with your science and you've also done sufficient homework about the funding agency and done associated preparation to cater to the funding agency's need. You must also have a clear picture of what the competition is going to be like and how the timeline of the process is going to look like. This slide is to quickly depict the journey of a typical grant. Once I'm not talking about the process which precedes the submission of a grant. That itself, like I said, will have to span across 3 to 6 months minimum to make sure all requirements are sufficiently addressed and effectively addressed. But post-submission, how does a typical grant application sail through with the funding agency? The first step is administrative checks. Funding agencies invariably have what they call a filtering step, or a preliminary check step, or an administrative step, where they make sure that the proposal is in line with the requirements of the scheme, is sticking to the mandate of the scheme, and is not a deviation there. And all administrative requirements like the proposal, the eligibility of the applicant, and administrative requirements like a budget and letters of support are all present, and it's a complete package. So a big deal of applications, big number of applications get filtered out here, especially because administrative requirements are not carefully looked at by applicants. Let's say your grant has cleared the administrative processing, then funding agencies typically send them out for peer review. This could be national peer review, or it could be an international peer review by experts who are approached by the funding agency, or it could also be a finite college of peer reviewers constituted by the funding agency for that particular scheme. Either way, they're going to have some kind of peer review, and typically each proposal is looked at by at least 3 peer reviewers for significant feedback and comments on the merits and demerits of the candidature. Now, how can one, as an applicant, also help the peer review process? Some schemes, some grants allow you to suggest potential reviewers for your grant. And because you know your topic very well, you're the leader of your particular field, so they would take your suggestions quite seriously. As long as there is no conflict of interest. For example, you cannot name your own mentor or your own postdoc supervisor as a potential reviewer. You cannot name somebody who is a co-investigator as a peer reviewer. But otherwise, if you give substantial suggestions, reasonable suggestions without conflicts of interest, the funding agency will take this seriously and try and approach those reviewers for their review reports. Now, apart from suggested reviewers, funding agencies also give you the option of restricting reviewers. For example, there is a close competitor in the field whom you do not want your work to be shared with them for obvious reasons, because you both are working on very closely related topics and there is very stiff competition. You should mention this to the funding agency, either in the form they provide or in a cover letter to the funding agency. You should mention that such and such reviewer will have to be restricted or conflicted because of these reasons. Again, here you have to make a very judicious choice of restricted reviewers. You cannot name every expert in the field and say, please don't send my application to this person. You cannot be paranoid there and say, oh, don't let him look at my application, don't look at her my application. The entire process of peer review works on entire process of grant disbursement works on peer review. So you will have to help this process by providing a reasonable set of potential reviewers if that's allowed. So peer review can extend over several months. And once the review reports are submitted by peer reviewers, most of this is done online these days. All the reviews are collated by the funding agency, which then sorts the applications or the proposals based on these on the merit of these review reports. And there can be 1 or 2 steps of shortlisting within the funding agency itself, with the help of either an internal committee or an external committee, right? Then the final step is typically a funding committee meeting, where the committee, which is empowered to make decisions, meets to discuss the proposals in the light of the review reports and give their recommendations as to the funding process. Now, the funding committee meeting might involve the meeting of just the committee, which is going to discuss the proposals against the backdrop of the review reports, or they might also invite shortlisted candidates or the candidate teams for an interview, for an interaction with the committee. Either way, I think it is imperative that the grant stands out in terms of its competitiveness, because that's kind of the first entry into the shortlisting step itself, which is why we're discussing grant writing today. Now, the funding committee, again, is typically empowered to make one of the following decisions. It can be a straight award, where whatever you have proposed and requested for is awarded in its entirety, or it can be a reduced award or a slashed award, where, okay, we fund you, but the amount of funding that's going to be available is only a fraction of what you've requested for. Or it could be a decline, or it could be a decline with an exceptional invitation to resubmit after addressing certain weaknesses of the proposal. So typically funding committees are empowered to take one of these decisions and communicate them to the applicant through the funding agency. So maybe we'll stop here for a couple of minutes and see if there are any questions before we talk about various components of a typical grant application.
Thanks, Madan. I think very comprehensive presentation so far. We do have a couple of questions for you, and it's great that you decided to stop at this point. Let me see what questions are there. So there's one question from Swati, and she asks, when grant reviewers review applications, do they give preference for applications having co-investigators as opposed to the one submitted by just the PI without any collaborators?
Yeah, I think there is no thumb rule here. It will all depend on the requirements of the project, right? If the like the experiments that you propose, like the components of the budget that you request, even the addition of co-investigators on your application will have to be in line with what the project requires. So if there is a certain component or element of your research which cannot be done by you because you don't have the expertise or the resources, please go ahead and add co-investigators. But please refrain from adding co-investigators just for the sake of adding them, just to make your team look fancy. So always go by what the proposal requires. But if you're in two minds about adding a co-investigator or not, if the scheme allows it, it is generally advisable to strengthen your team with co-investigators. I think even the government funding agencies now make it mandatory almost that there has to be at least one co-investigator from the host institution itself for purposes of sustainability, continuity of the proposal. But yeah, like I said, it has to be dictated by the requirements of the project.
Great, thank you. And I hope, Swati, your question is answered there. So Amresh Mishra, who has just completed their PhD in cancer biology from India, wants to know what grants or project calls can they apply for at this stage?
Like I said, I think India Bioscience has a very good showcase of funding opportunities, perennial opportunities or opportunities that come up, at specific time points. Please do visit their website and follow their social media pages. One can also look at, science jobs, nature careers, and even current science. I think for life science research community in India, I think there's an elaborate catalog of opportunities that get publicized. So I think current science doesn't have an online version, but it's definitely worth checking their publications, which come out periodically. It's quite comprehensive. So yeah, so Amresh, I would suggest that you look at the opportunities that are cataloged in India Biosciences resources. And for example, you could also look at India Alliance Early Career Fellowship if you're looking for a postdoc fellowship in India, an independent yet mentored program, which is quite prestigious.
Thank you, Madan. So I hope the participants here are making note of the various resources that are being talked about, so you can make an informed choice about what kind of grants to apply and what are the opportunities for you. So I'll take two more questions, before you continue your presentation. So one is that so Graceline says that ISRO and DST are giving high preference to IITs, which stops other universities to think about applying for those proposals. So is it so? Is there any bias in the affiliations of these of the people who have applied for these grants? So is that something to be aware of?
Yeah, my response to that would be no. Funding committees and reviewers are generally agnostic to the place from where the application comes. I think what matters more is the productivity of the applicant or the applicant team and the scientific merit, the soundness of the research proposal itself. So my suggestion would be to not try and put too much importance to these factors. If you can demonstrate to the review committee that you have a fantastic proposal which is backed by expertise, which is backed by preliminary data, which is backed by a stellar CV, then I think affiliations should not matter much. That's my take on that.
Okay, thank you. I think that is very useful, and I'm sure you would, Graceline, you should not think about these biases that are there, and rather maybe focus more on the quality of the grant that you're putting forward,
Exactly.
and that would really give you the edge. One last question is, how do we decide for the grant budget? And after this, you can definitely move to the typical grant application that you'll be talking
We will
about.
have a small subsection on budget itself. Maybe when we cover the general pointers there, if there are still further questions, maybe we could take them.
Absolutely. Sounds good. So over to you. Back to you, Madan.
But I think Setu Selvi also has some questions on preliminary data. I think we will come to that when we discuss the next set of slides.
Absolutely. Over to you. Back to you.
Thank you. Okay, so a typical grant application has 4 or 5 different components. Again, this might vary from funding agency to agency. It might vary from scheme to scheme. It might vary depending on whether it's a fellowship versus a grant. In a fellowship, it is typically individual. The focus is on the individual. The focus is on the PI and to empower the PI. Whereas in a grant, it is typically a team of 2 or more researchers, and the focus is more on the robustness of the idea. So in a fellowship, the emphasis is on the person, whereas in the grant, the emphasis is more on the proposal. So a grant application, the components of a grant application would differ depending on which of these categories it falls under. But let's talk very generally about what the major components are. The proposal, the research proposal, the detailed research project itself is like the backbone of a grant application. It is the most essential component, but it is not the only essential component. Grant application also has the CV of the applicant or team of applicants and a little bit about their academic background, their employment, and so on. The budget forms an integral part, especially if your application has crossed the first stage and it's into the full application stage. An elaborate budget would normally be requested. And then supporting letters, either from the institution or from collaborators, are also going to add to the strength of a grant. There are some other sections as well, which typically are not given that much importance by applicants, but my request would be to treat them with equal importance to the research proposal itself. Right. So let's talk in great detail about the research proposal and the components of a research proposal. What are the essentials of a research proposal? If we talk about a research proposal in very plain language, from a very high level view, there are just 4 essentials of a research proposal to be competitive. One is it has to have an underlying question or a set of questions which are worth answering, right? It must not be a mere statement or a re-establishment of a statement. It has to have research questions which are worth answering. And among the plethora of questions that are worth answering, it has to have a defined set of questions that can be answered given the constraints of this particular grant in terms of time and money. Okay, the research proposal will also have to articulate what those questions are and how that can be answered. And then an obvious next step is a defined path between the question and the answer, or the questions and answers. And this path will have to be embellished, will have to be supported by all it takes in terms of resources, in terms of expertise, to be able to traverse that path between the question and the answer. And of course, demonstrable ability to walk that path. So if your proposal has these 4, what the grant typically asks for is to just rearrange the content under different sections so that you talk about all these 4 aspects in a coherent way. So I know it's easier said than done. So genesis of the main idea is the actual bottleneck or the rate limiting step in the conception of a research proposal. So in corporate language, some of you might have heard this, that people use the acronym called SMART, that the idea that is being discussed will have to be specific. It will have to have clearly defined deliverables, which are measurable and not generic or vaguely defined. It has to be achievable, or it has to be a feasible set of things that form the core components of the idea. The idea will have to be relevant. It has to be of interest to not just you, but at least to the small area of expertise that you are working in. And it has to be time bound. It cannot be open-ended in terms of its timelines. All aspects will have to be marked by different milestones which are time bound. Now, an equivalent of this is used in the research domain, where one asks if the idea, which is going to form the core of the proposal, passes what is known as the FINER test. The acronym FINER stands for feasibility. Top on the list is feasibility. Does the proposal involve an adequate number of participants, adequate skill mix, and is it manageable within the time frame and budget? Now, why do we emphasize so much on feasibility? I think in the last half an hour, I've mentioned feasibility at least 3-4 times. It's because, like I said, there is stiff competition for a limited pool of money. So something that is over ambitious and cannot be achieved will not fly high with reviewers. At the same time, something which is underwhelming, which is really under ambitious and does not stretch the limits of what is available, will also not be appealing to the reviewers. So one has to strike this balance quite carefully. The idea has to be interesting, and will it be of interest to someone in the field? It has to be novel. Is there no previous answer to this question, or will the answer at least confirm, refute, or extend previous findings? Here again, novelty is an important component that committees typically look for, because the way scientific knowledge improves or advances is, building on each other's knowledge and taking the forward. So there has to be something novel that you're bringing to the table through your grant. The idea and the execution of the idea will have to be ethical. Will somebody get hurt during the study? By hurt, we not only mean physical hurt, can also be mental hurt. So even while conceiving the proposal, I'm sure you would have talked about this yesterday as well, author contributions and, other ethical considerations. Similarly, for a grant, one will have to be the lead applicant will have to make sure that the team assembled is ethically assembled and there is due acknowledgement and appreciation for contributions coming from various stakeholders. And this is equally important to the animal and human participant related ethics that we typically speak of in biomedical research. It has to be relevant, and one will also always have to think about impact, not just about the immediate results, but also the long-term impact of the deliverables of the project. Who will benefit from the data? Who will benefit from the results? Is it just going to be you, your supervisor, or is it the field, the society, or in an even wider perspective, is it going to advise policy and so on? So if your idea passes the FINER test, I think it's good to go in terms of starting to conceive the proposal. Now, do all ideas have to pass the FINER test? Will all ideas have relevance for policy? I think the answer is no. But there has to be clear articulation as to what the relevance of the project is. As much as importance is accorded to translational value of research these days, the reviewers like to see a translational angle to research, but still there are schemes which very passionately support basic research, basic fundamental research. So one must not shy away from pursuing fundamental research if it has implications and potential for advancing the field in a big way. So let's say the idea passes the FINER test, one will have to articulate the research question. Everything else can be built around the research question, but the research question is sacrosanct, and there cannot be any compromise on the quality of the research question itself. Why do we say fine-tune the research question? You have to fine-tune it for clarity. There is this example here which says, why are social networking sites harmful? To make this question a bit more clear, one could rephrase it as, how are online users experiencing or addressing privacy issues on social networking sites like Facebook? So this is a much clearer version of what is given on the top, right? So if If the second thing is what you're actually going to be pursuing, there is no point in framing your question in the first style. So you'll have to be very clear on what are the specific things that your specific points or aims that your research is going to be carrying. Associated with clarity is focus. For example, what is the effect on the environment from global warming? This is a very broad and unfocused kind of a question. Whereas if you want to narrow down the focus and sharpen it further, you could say, how is glacial melting affecting penguins in Antarctica? Right? So if the second one is what you're actually pursuing, please refrain from using the first one. And then very closely related is the debate around simplicity versus complexity. This question is too simple here. How are doctors addressing diabetes in the US? Whereas the actual question that the applicant is looking at has multiple layers of complexity to it. What are common traits of those suffering from diabetes in America? And how can these commonalities be used to aid the medical community in prevention of the disease, right? So the question has to be adequately clear, focused, and it will have to make a firm balance between the simplicity and complexity. Okay, let's now look at the actual components of the research proposal. What are various components that go into the research proposal of a grant? Maybe I'll stop here and ask people to put in the chat box as to what you think is the most essential component of a research proposal. Just take 30 seconds to think about it. Okay, somebody says novelty, well written and clear. I'm not asking about attributes, I'm asking about sections of the proposal. Relevance, approach, objectives, methods, abstract, research question, gap areas, hourglass structure, very interesting. I think there are many interesting answers coming in the chat box. Impact, yes. Budget, feasibility. Again, all of you are talking about different attributes, but I'm asking for the actual components of the grant itself, actual components of the proposal itself, deliverables, impact, okay? Okay, thank you so much for all these answers, but I think I will give it to the participant named Rashmi, who I think was the first to say that the title is probably the single most important part of the proposal, because this is the first part of a proposal that reviewers and committee members typically read, right? And they're probably going to invest 30 seconds of their time reading your title and seeing if it matches the scope of their funding agency, if it matches the scope of their expertise, and if it is worth funding, right? So the title is like the teaser, and it will have to be clear, precise, and provocative in the positive tone. Now, titles normally have very strictly defined word limits. They're probably going to give you, I don't know, 25 to 50 words or maybe 100 characters. So within that space, you will have to give a title which is clear, which is precise, and at the same time also interesting to the reader to delve further into the document and understand what you're trying to say. Okay, so you will have to strike a balance between between being interesting and being informative. You do not want to spell out your entire idea into one sentence and put it as the title, right? You want to leave some room for to generate interest. At the same time, one cannot, just for the sake of being attractive and being a catchy title, one cannot claim or use a title which looks very flashy, which doesn't normally fit within the boundaries of scientific writing. So you'll have to make a very clear balance there. No funding agency is going to say that, please don't use a flashy title or please don't use an elaborate title. They're not going to give you guidelines about what tone your title has to be, what level of formality has to be there in your title. but you will have to think like a reader, and you'll have to think like an expert in a slightly related field, slightly remote field, to see if your title is conveying what you want to convey and generate interest. Some of you in the chat box had mentioned abstract as an important part of the research proposal. I completely agree. If the title is the teaser, abstract is like the trailer. Somebody who has spent 30 seconds reading your title is probably going to spend like 2.5 minutes reading your abstract. And like we discussed in the manuscript module yesterday, the abstract is like a standalone section, and it's probably the only part or one of the few parts of the proposal which get indexed or which becomes available immediately to the peer reviewers. In the first instance, the funding agency does not share the entire proposal with a potential reviewer. They share only the title and abstract. So your abstract will have to impress the reviewer and generate interest for them to agree to review the remainder of your proposal. Okay, so again, abstract comes with word limits, with character limits, so you will have to make judicious use of the space provided. Some advice that typically is given is that you write the abstract section last, because you've written all the other parts of the proposal, and then you now have an overarching view of the proposal. That is when you're actually prepared to write the abstract. So general advice is that you reserve writing the abstract till the last and revise it as much as possible, because it's probably the most important part of your proposal. Now, what do you write in an abstract? Abstract is hardly 5 or 6 sentences, right? So you will have to think about just 4 or 5 different items. One is what is known in the field. You set the context about, widely about what is known in that particular area of research. So one sentence on context. Then, given this context, what is missing in the field, or what we call as need. Okay, you write about context, you write about need, and then what you're going to do to address that need, and how will that be done? Okay, and is that all, or do we also write about something else in the abstract? One would normally also write about the impact, right? I think in response to the previous question, many of you said impact. So the abstract will always have to have a closing sentence which highlights the impact of the proposed work. In other words, why should one care about your work? Okay, it's a very interesting field, it's very interesting to you, and you're using novel methods to address a very pertinent research question, but why should one care? That should form the last sentence or last 1.5 sentences of your abstract, so that reviewers who may not be directly working in your field, but who understand your field a little bit, will be immediately able to connect with what your project is going to deliver. To reiterate, context, need, what you're doing to address the gap, how will it be done, and what impact the outcomes will have. So if you write 5 sentences for each of in 1 sentence for each of these 5 points, I think you will have a beautifully written abstract. Now, writing the background or the introduction part of the proposal is also going to be important, because here you're going to orient the reader. They might not be directly working in your field, they might be working in a slightly remote field. So they need some kind of orientation or handholding to understand the significance of the work and what are the missing gaps, what are the lacunae in the field that you're setting out to address. Now, this is a very tricky part of the proposal, because the entire proposal itself is probably going to give you only 1,000-word limit, 1,000 words is the limit, or 2,500 words is the limit, or at the most 5,000 words. Now, how do you fit a sufficiently informative background within this word limit is a big challenge. Most funding agencies will not give you any guidelines about how many words you devote for background, how many words you devote for aims. Some funding agencies do. If they do that, well and good. If not, you will have to do a judicious rationing between different parts of the proposal. Now, if it's a 2,500 word proposal in all, I would say maybe a maximum of 500 words or 600 words for background. Again, there is no hard fast rule here. This is just a guideline or a suggestion. This is allowed to allow you to have sufficient space for the other components of the. Now, how do you fit so much of information into the background with such a small word limit, right? Normally, the tendency or the temptation is to make sure or is to try and make sure that your proposal reads like an encyclopedia for a particular field, that the reader has all the information that is available to understand your field. But unfortunately, you don't have the space and bandwidth to do that. So one practical tip would be is to, instead of trying and explaining all concepts yourself, direct them to well-cited reviews in the field. Okay, direct them to well-cited literature in the field, so the reviewer can go back and read those reviews and understand the field and the questions in your field. While doing that, don't go back to all the reviews available in the field. They're not going to have the time and patience to do that. Just focus on the ones that are, really pertinent. And if you have to explain some concepts yourself, go back in time or in space only to a certain limit. Don't go back to 1950s or 1960s when the field started developing. Just go back a few years. Again, this may be or may not be applicable to your topic, but if it is, just go back in time only to a certain degree and not way back into the past. Somebody also talked about the inverted funnel model, which is absolutely right. It is comparable to what we discussed in the manuscript writing module. You start with a broad description of the field, and then you go down like a funnel into the precise research topics that you're going to be addressing. So always think about it as a funnel, and each sentence will have to take you down the funnel. You'll have to make sure you're following the trajectory of the funnel and not going in the reverse direction. Now, hypothesis. Again, somebody in the chat mentioned hypothesis. I was quite impressed by that. Hypothesis is very, very important. It is a statement which has to be well defined and crisp. And it is an overarching statement which is going to test the validity of your research question, of your proposal. So it has to be clearly defined and not ambiguous. It has to be deep and non-contrived. When we say non-contrived, it should not be an artificial build-up. It has to be like a naturally flowing hypothesis or statement based on the knowledge available. Now, one major fault that grants typically have is that they do not have a hypothesis, or the hypothesis is not clearly articulated. So sometimes reviewers say that the hypothesis is not mentioned or it is not clearly articulated, and we had to dive deep into the proposal to identify what the hypothesis is. So our advice to applicants is that you, after writing the background, you start a fresh paragraph with this opening sentence which says, we hypothesize that, or our major hypothesis is, and then go on to write in 1 or 1.5 sentences what your actual hypothesis is. Now, we will discuss later that reviewers are very, very busy people. So I've seen reviewers, as soon as they review grants, there are some reviewers who immediately do a control F for the word hypo or hypothesis to see what the actual hypothesis is. So if you're going to miss out on this opportunity where you're not articulating hypothesis, then it's a battle already lost. Now, following the hypothesis, you will have aims and objectives. These will have to be realistic in the sense they'll have to be achievable, doable within the constraints of the grant. And we say holistic because all the aims together should, form a wholesome story. It should weave together to a compelling story. Here again, there may or may not be specific guidelines, but the typical advice, the normal advice is that don't have more than 3 aims per grant, and maybe 1 or 2 sub-aims under each aim. Because grants are typically for 3 years or 5 years, so there's only so much one can do. So do not flood your proposal with too many aims, and at the same time, don't keep it underwhelmed also. Reviewers have a lot of comments about aims and objectives. One comment or a set of comments which I find particularly interesting is this. Sometimes the reviewers say that there are 3 aims, and the aims are completely independent of each other, and they do not together form a wholesome story. On the other hand, some reviewers might say there are three aims, but aim 2 and 3 are overly dependent on aim 1. So if aim 1 fails, it means aim 2 and 3 are not going to be doable. So this, on one side you have too much dependence between the aims, and on the other side you have too much independence among the aims, and they're so disjoint and in silos kind of a scenario. So you will have to have an approach where the aims adequately feed into each other, but even if one aim fails, the show doesn't stop. Okay. Work plan, the methodology, I think this is an easy component to write because you've been doing or you plan to do this kind of research day in, day out. So you'll be very thorough with the work plan, but provide adequate details to ensure reproducibility of your work if somebody was going to pursue it. Don't try and make this work plan or the research methodology section a glorified version of your lab book. Don't put all the details in there. Just focus on methodology that will be absolutely crucial for the work. And if it is going to be a routinely used protocol, which has been used over and over again by other groups, or it has been used by you in different publications before, it is okay to give that citation as a reference and only very briefly describe the protocol rather than describing it in very much detail from the beginning. And yeah, as and when possible, if there are any tweaks to the protocol that you're planning to do, which has worked in your hands and is part of some unpublished work, and you would like to convey it to the reviewers, please go ahead and add this, because otherwise it's going to be a very dull and monotonous section of the grant. So if there are any interesting tweaks which you think are reproducible, please add information about that as well. And work plan again will include, the samples, the statistical approaches, any backup approaches you will have, and all that. So somebody who's setting out on the project should be able to use this as a guidebook to take the work forward. Deliverables, some grants will ask you to explicitly articulate the deliverables, some may not. So if they're going to ask you to give year-wise deliverables or half-year-wise deliverables, what will be achieved and associated milestones, think about what can be realistically done and match it quite nicely with the aims and objectives. Don't make it inconsistent with the aims and objectives, right? The entire grant, various sections of these should read like a coherent document. You cannot have a set of aims which do not give you a certain set of deliverables, right? So the hypothesis, aims, work plan, deliverables, they all should read in a coherent fashion. Preliminary data is always good to have because it shows preparedness, it shows your ability to carry out that work. But what if you don't have preliminary data? What if you don't? What if you're switching fields and you're, from field A, you're writing a proposal to enter field B? You don't have preliminary data to show, right? So although many funding agencies do not say that preliminary data is mandatory, they always attach weightage and importance to preliminary data because it is quite a good value addition to your proposal. Okay, so let's say you don't have preliminary data. How do you compensate for that? We have seen some bright researchers who compensate for lack of preliminary data with one of the following ways. One is that they would, in their covering letter, they would highlight parts of their CV or their accomplishments in terms of publication, which complement that new area and say, because I've been able to do this, I firmly believe that I'll be able to do this, although it is a field switch for me, right? You could try and address this in the cover letter. And I don't mean to say that it will absolutely convince the reviewer, but they will at least know that you're thinking about this lacuna and you're doing something to address this lacuna. The second way to do this is probably request your referees, your mentors to mention this in their letters, saying that although this person doesn't have preliminary data, they are well poised, they are well positioned to carry out the work because of such and such reasons. So if you make an effort to put it in your support letters that even in the absence of preliminary data, you're able to do this work, then it might strike a chord with reviewers. Another way of doing is, of course, to identify co-investigators or collaborators who would, or mentors who would be able to guide you in that particular field. So, and if the mentors can mention it, that they're absolutely willing to handhold you and guide you in the new field, that might also be viewed positively by reviewers. So don't fret if you don't have relevant data. See what you can do best with what you already have in terms of your publication record so far, in terms of what you're going to, how you're going to sell your skill set, and how you're going to request your reviewers to sell your skill set for you. So by a combination of these, you can try and address this lacuna if possible. Yeah, I think this is just a cartoon to say how research is supposed to work. You write a grant, you get funds, you do research and publish results. But how it actually works, you do research, you get results but don't publish them yet. You call them preliminary results and you write another grant to do what part of what you already did, get funds for that, and then the cycle goes on. Just a common approach to how it is, but typically it shouldn't be that way. Preliminary data should actually be something that you have done in preparation for the grant with the resources, with the time that is already available to you. We move to how to write. Maybe just a couple of questions we can take, Madhurima, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think your presentation has been very lucid so far, but we do have an interesting question with someone asking, how can I compose and include all the necessary information on my one-page proposal as requested by the funding agency as initial applications, without missing on essential elements?
Yes. Yeah, I agree with Buhari here. I think they're trying to say that writing a preliminary application is much more difficult than writing a full application. It's absolutely true, because you are so engrossed in the field that you're okay to write a chapter but not a page. So I think the way to do it is to set internal guidelines or word limits to yourself. If they're going to give you 750 words, do a partitioning of what will be covered under how many words. For example, background in 100 words, hypothesis question in 25 words, research methodology maybe 30 words, something like this. Do a good partitioning for yourself. And here one can always benefit from the value of feedback. Once you've written the first draft, share it with somebody who is probably not in your own lab, but in the next lab, who knows a little bit about your lab's work, but is not a direct expert. Ask them for feedback, ask them if it makes sense, ask them if it is sufficiently supported with references. You will always get feedback from people who knows your field, but is not a direct expert. So in a one-page proposal, yeah, so you do this partitioning to yourself of the word limit and also work on feedback. Maybe also get your supervisor's feedback is what I would say. Also write the draft, set it aside for a couple of days, go revisit it. You will notice invariably that, the first few sentences that you've written make no sense at all. That's okay. Be open to revising your write-up again. But make sure, especially if it's going to be the prelim stage of your application, don't focus too much on details, because they know for a fact that you will be presenting them in the full proposal. Focus more on the impact and the outcomes. The details can always come in the full proposal. Focus more on impacts and outcomes rather than on methodology.
Great, useful tips. Another question is, there are two questions actually. One is, can you explain about non-contrived? And the second one is, how important is the general sentiment in the field? So, for example, mRNA vaccines are a rage at the moment. So is there a higher chance that a proposal in this area gets accepted over something which may not be so popular, or,
Right.
buzz of the time? Yeah.
All right. Okay, the first question about non-contrived. When we say non-contrived is just a fancy word for natural. Okay, contrived is something that is built up artificially and deliberately introduced. But your hypothesis will have to be an opposite of that. It has to be like a natural flow emanating from what is known in the field. That's what I meant about non-contrived. It has to be, it must not be artificial or forced. It has to be a natural hypothesis that emerges from the knowledge in the field. I hope that answers the question. The next question is about the general sentiment in the field. So normally general sentiments in the field, some funding agencies pick on those and they might introduce separate schemes or calls to reflect that sentiment. But if it's not mentioned in that particular call for applications, if it's only a very broad term, if it's only a broad call, then I think they will not attach too much importance to what is considered as a hot topic in the field. They will try and give equal coverage to all the topics that are being. So again here, like how we were discussing for an earlier question, please be guided by what is interesting to you, what you have the expertise to do, and what you have the wherewithal to do. Don't be misguided by what you think is a hot topic in the field. If it's not going to be interesting to you, it's going to become a cold topic sooner or later. So if the funding agency does not mention it explicitly, they're not going to pay too much attention to sentiments in the field.
Fantastic, Madan. I think we're good to move to the next section of the presentation.
All right. Yeah. So how to write? I know we've talked about what to write, but how do we actually get to the part of writing sentences? Because once you start writing your manuscript or proposal, I'm sure you're going to be hit by the writer's block. So how do you overcome that? Just a few tips to bear in mind, probably. One is that you must bear in mind that a grant has to be written in a way that an overworked reviewer can understand it after a sleepless night while being stuck at an airport, probably without coffee, right? So there's no reviewer who's waiting at the desk, waiting for that email to arrive with your proposal to review. They're just going to do it between other jobs. They're probably at the airport. They're probably sitting at another committee meeting while reviewing your proposal. Because all of these are busy people. So you will, if you're going to not grab their attention, or if you're not going to impress them, then it's a waste of effort. Stop waiting for inspiration. Don't wait for a particular time of the year when you think you will probably collect sufficient data so you can start putting together a proposal. If you have an idea that's starting to take shape, start writing quickly. Don't wait for inspiration. And sometimes, because none of us are native speakers, it's sometimes difficult to construct sentences in a meaningful way. It's all in your head, but it doesn't come on paper or on Microsoft Word. So one tip that some people use is they read sentences written by other people. They pay attention to parts of that sentence, those sentences which stand out for them, and try and imitate writing style. While I was writing my PhD thesis, I used to have a folder called Interesting Sentences, where I would copy paste and put sentences, not paragraphs or papers, just sentences where I think were well written. So over time, when you go through that collection, you get to see what stands out to you. So if it's going to be interesting to you, if it stands out to you, it's very likely that it will be interesting to other people also. So it's okay to imitate writing styles. It's also a good idea to talk about your research first before you actually start writing, because when you talk to peers and friends about your idea, it also gives you, or you present it in the form of a PowerPoint presentation, it gives you a natural filter to eliminate parts that you don't want to go into the grant. At least that level of filtering will be enabled by talking about your research before actually starting to write. It helps you crystallize your thoughts and condense them. And try to make rough drafts in your journal, and always have this in your mind that you are writing to engage. Now, writing to inform is okay, but you should aspire to write to engage, because only then somebody who is not in the field is going to be investing their time and effort into your proposal. And revise. Don't be, for this, again, one has to allot sufficient time so that there is enough time to revise and modify your proposal. be open to revising your proposal based on all these points we discussed, based on feedback you received from peers. So revision is an important step. So please allow sufficient time for that. I also wanted to show some examples of how not to write. Let's just quickly read the sentence here. This is from a manuscript, I think, or maybe an introduction section of a grant, which says, these findings imply that the rates of ascorbate radical production and its recycling via dehydroascorbate reductase to replenish the ascorbate pool are equivalent at the lower irradiance, but not equivalent at higher irradiance, with a rate of ascorbate radical production exceeding its recycling back to ascorbate. Now, even the person who wrote this sentence will have to read it 5-6 times to make sure that it actually is meaningful. Now, one way of probably writing this would be, I don't know if somebody wants to take a guess or wants to give it a try. But yeah, in the interest of time, let me just show this slightly better written example, which says, these findings imply that at low irradiation, ascorbate radicals are produced and recycled at the same rate, but at high irradiation, they're produced faster than they can be recycled back to ascorbate, right? So what this person has done is try to keep the technical jargon to the minimum, and they've also replaced the noun forms, production and recycling, with the verb form, produced and recycled, which significantly brings down the complexity of the sentence. And this kind of rephrasing will be possible only if there is adequate time for revision of your manuscript, of your grant. So contrary to popular opinion, one does not have to write long-sounding, elaborate, bombastic sentences to impress reviewers. Write simple, grammatically correct, but not oversimplified sentences, which will stand out in your grant. I also like this particular example about a story which happens, or a scene which happens in a household. I'm so excited about telling you this great story. My father is on the front lawn cleaning the lawnmower. My sister is in the kitchen making a cake. My mom has gone shopping, and I'm playing the electric guitar in my bedroom. Do you like my story? No? Why? It's a great story. What's that you're saying? My story has no plot. See, it describes my family's activities, starting with my father. We all have something in common. We are living under one roof. So this is one way of describing what is happening in the house, right? This might sound, carily similar to what we read in some grants or manuscripts. In the characterization of protein XYZ, this researcher did this, that researcher did that. In Germany, so-and-so is doing something else. And I'm doing this particular thing because it's interesting and nobody has done it before. So this is something that we often encounter in manuscripts and grants. Now, is there a way to rephrase this story and make it slightly more interesting? See what I'm so excited about telling you this great story. My father is on the front lawn cleaning the lawnmower, and do you know what that means? Trouble. He hates it. He wants everyone to help bring this or that in order to feel less miserable. Whenever that happens, we all run away, not because we refuse to help him, but because he wants us to stand there doing nothing while he works. So my sister is taking refuge in the kitchen and is plunging her hands in flour to slowly make a cake. My mom has suddenly discovered that she's missing something or the other and has rushed out to shop, saying she'll be gone for an hour. And for me, I'm in my bedroom playing my guitar with my amplifier at maximum volume. So this story again describes exactly what is happening in the house. Similar to what was described before, but it gives you a great, a better feel for what the ties or what the sentiments or the emotions that are there in the house, right? This is because there is some logical connection between the different actions, and there is some kind of reasoning to enhance the flow. So this is just an example from fiction, which you could probably think about while writing your scientific manuscript. So, because we talk a lot about words, choice of words is an absolutely critical part of putting together your grant, because there are millions of words out there, but in many scenarios, there's only one or two appropriate words for a particular space of your grant. especially with verbs and especially with adjectives. So one will have to choose those words very carefully. This slide is only to give an idea, depending on whether it's knowledge or whether it's comprehension that you're talking about, or whether it is application or analysis or synthesis or evaluation, there's a different set of words available for each of these actions. So your choice of words should be such that what you want to convey is precisely conveyed. Now, a choice of words is important. It's not something which will make or break a grant, but it is what makes a grant look great in amongst several other good grants. Okay, it's not like a make or break factor, but it's usually something that enhances the appeal and readability of your grant. So, writing style is closely associated with choice of words. There's debate on whether you choose active versus passive voice. You probably touched upon this yesterday during the manuscript writing module. But there's always this discussion whether one uses the active voice, where they say, we did this experiment, rather than in the passive voice where it said, this experiment was done. Okay. In earlier years, I think there used to be a lot of emphasis on the passive voice because there was always advice that the focus should be on the action and the result and not on the person doing it. But in recent times, I think, at least for the sake of clarity, publishing houses and funding agencies appreciate active voice wherever it is possible, wherever it is applicable, and use active voice just for the simple fact that there is you can avoid ambiguity about who has done what. Okay, especially if it's going to be an introduction part of your grant, where you're talking about what other people have done, what your lab has done so far in that particular field, and what you are proposing to do, right? You're talking about several different groups of researchers here. So here, if you're going to, again, complicate it with using passive voice, it's going to be a little confusing. So here, one would normally use active voice. So yeah, as and when possible, please use active voice. One advice which is still given is to not use the first person and say, I did this or I will be doing this. Even if it's a single investigator grant, people like to read the word we. So please say, we will do this, or we will pursue this, and so on. Now, we're talking about word limits and page limits. So the chances of your grant getting accepted will not improve if you exceed the word or page limit. Please don't be compelled to fill your response till the brim of the word limit also. If you think you're going on rambling, please stop where you're stopping, till the place where you're making sense. You don't have to fill all 500 words if it's a question that has a 500 word limit. Sometimes funding agencies, instead of word limits, they give you page limits. They will say, we will accept 5 A4 pages. Okay. Don't try to, game the regulations, don't game the rules, or, find a loophole with the rules and use microfonts and no margins just to fit and cram a lot of stuff into 5 pages. If the funding agency says, please present supplementary information in 5 A4 pages, you for a fact know with what ethos or with what principle they're giving you that guideline, right? Don't try to find a way of playing with that guideline and say, okay, I'll do 5 pages, but I will use font size 6. That's what I'm trying to say. And if they're not asking for any appendices, please don't provide appendices. You do not have to attach all your high school, high secondary school mark certificates if they have not asked for it. Only provide what is requested by the funding agency and what is relevant to your proposal. Don't use jargon or too many acronyms. Like I said, your proposal might be read by people not directly in your field. So keep it as semi-technical as possible. And don't feel compelled to cite every reference on the topic. Cite only the absolutely pertinent, relevant ones. While doing that, you'll have to be very careful because you cannot put down the work of somebody else in the field saying that previous studies have been horrible or previous studies have been unsuccessful or something like that. Please do not use harsh language when you're talking about what other people have done in the field, for the selfish reason that that particular person could actually be your reviewer, right? So it's always a good idea not to put down anyone else just to show that your work is more glorified than theirs. And when you're stuck between paragraphs or within paragraphs and you don't know how to start the next sentence, always chase down this idea, so what and what's next. And if you think about a response to so what and what's next, invariably you will get a beautiful sentence to keep the paragraph flowing. So most proposals have the same flaws. I know we have talked about a lot of do's so far, but there are so many proposals which suffer from the same flaws. I just list down a set of flaws. Such protocol shows insufficient planning. The work plan is too ambitious. They're shooting for the stars. It looks like a fishing expedition. It is not feasible within the time frame. The text fails to convey the novelty and urgency of the research. Here, reviewers might be very careful in wording their feedback. They would not say that the work is not novel or the work is not urgent enough. They would say that the text fails to convey the novelty and urgency of the research, which means that it's probably novel, but the person has not written it that way. So you'll have to make an attempt to project these factors quite well. Language is too technical for non-specialist reviewers. Spelling errors. Yeah, this is not a trivial thing. I'm sure you discussed this yesterday also. Spelling errors, grammatical errors, and lengthy proposals that exceed word limits would also not fly high. Plagiarized content, poor grantsmanship, lack of ethical considerations. There are smart tools now which can immediately pick up plagiarized content. And please be mindful that even self-plagiarism is not tolerated by many funding agencies, even if it's your own publication, which is published elsewhere. You cannot use those same sentences. You will definitely have to rephrase it when you're submitting it to a new funding agency. So most of these proposals can be somehow, most of these flaws can somehow be prevented by these three things. One is better reading and literature coverage of the field, feedback from mentors and peers, and reading and editing by yourself. So if you do these three things and allow sufficient time for these, I think most flaws can be avoided. More grant killers, I'm going to show this just as a warning to be aware of, so that while conceiving your grant, while formulating your proposal, you try and avoid the grant killer. Making the question fit the data available. Like I said, it has to be non-contrived. It should not be like a forced marriage. The data available and the question should somehow make a good. Grants which do not have sample size estimates or incorrect sample size estimates or no controls are also considered weak. This is particularly relevant for experiments involving animals or human participants. Invariably, there's going to be some feedback about the sample size estimates. So make sure that the sample size estimates are well thought through. It's also a good idea to have a biostatistician on the team. Some committees view that favorably. If you're not an expert yourself, and if the grant allows you to have a co-investigator or a collaborator, please try and get a biostatistician on board to help you with sample size estimates. Study design is unclear, or you've tried to combine 2 or 3 different study designs in a hybrid fashion without proper justification for doing so. That is also going to show scientific, it's going to reflect as scientific immaturity. Attempting to hide flaws in the design. If your study design is limited for certain reasons, I'm sure there's no perfect study design out there. So it's always a good idea to be mindful and articulate the flaws or limitations in the study design. Adding complex or expensive extra measures that are not relevant to your work, just to make your proposal look a little more fancy, a little more appealing. Do not add any complex or expensive experiments which will not give you any value addition to the proposal. Failure to discuss or cite relevant previous work. We talked about this earlier, particularly if it is something which is closely associated with your field. Sorry to be a little negative today, but I'm going to give you one more slide of grant killers. Which these are again comments we receive very often on research proposals, that it's a very, very valid idea, but it's not generalizable to the wider world. It has a very, very narrow scope of application. I know reviewers who say this are very cruel because you cannot think of your research proposal to solve all the problems in the world, but at least try and articulate or mention the implications that it will have for the field going forward. Okay, that way you can preempt this comment which says that it's not generalizable to the wider community. Weak justification of budgets. If the budgets is not in line or if it's weakly justified, it's going to be granted. We'll come to that soon. Tokenistic capacity building, dissemination, public engagement. Some proposals ask you for what are your plans to engage with the public and generate awareness about your research. You can present your efforts or your plans there, but make it like a genuine effort and don't make it like a tokenistic approach. Ambition experience mismatch. Very high ambition, low experience, very, very competitive, competent team, but very underwhelming, ambitious project. Avoid this kind of mismatch. Plagiarism, we talked about it, and deviation from guidelines. Guidelines in terms of how many letters, what word limits, any form of guideline that the funding agency has given. And, last but not the least, losing the file when the computer crashes. When it's 11:45 and the deadline is 12 o'clock, and your computer decides to not cooperate with you anymore. If you do not have a backup, then there's not going to be any help that's going to be forthcoming. So always take adequate backups of different versions of your grant. So with this, we've covered a majority of what I wanted to say today. There are just a few more slides about CV, budget, and letters. Madhurima, should we stop here and take some more questions?
Yes, Madan, let me see. Okay, so we have a question from Shubhita, who says that sometimes grant is rejected, saying that the PI has no experience in the above field, despite the fact that the student or the PDF has publications in the proposed field. So how do you, generally deal with that?
Yeah. Okay, this could be given as a reason for rejection, if among the cohort of applications that have been reviewed, your proposal does not stand out. And this would otherwise not be a problem, but considering the competitiveness of other teams in terms of the proposal that they have put forward and the available expertise, maybe yours or the PI has slightly lesser experience in the field. Okay, so if the funding agency would ask you for a rebuttal or would give you an opportunity to claim against the decision, you could try and demonstrate to them that through this manuscripts, I have actually demonstrated ability to do this work. Could this be considered or reconsidered by the funding agency? They might not do that once the decisions are taken, but don't get upset with these kind of decline letters. Just try and make sure that in your next grant, you highlight your experience adequately to make sure that the reviewer does not miss it in the wealth of information that you provide.
Okay, thank you. So I think this also covers another question where somebody asked whether, just like peer review comments, are you given a feedback on why a certain grant proposal is rejected or not? So
I would say sometimes yes, funding agencies give very elaborate feedback, but it also depends on which stage of the application process one gets declined. If it's at the very preliminary stage, they might not give you much feedback, but if it's an elaborate proposal that has undergone peer review, they might share anonymized versions of the review feedback with you for future. But again, this is very rare currently, at least in the Indian scenario. You normally do not get feedback. But to compensate for that, what I would say is, in case you've not had the time to get your proposal read by experts in the field, but you get a rejection anyway from the granting agency, you can then talk to somebody a senior researcher, for example, who normally sits at several funding committees, show the proposal to them and see what could be the reason for the rejection. very often, because it all boils down to competition, right? There are 700 proposals received and there is funds to award 20. What would they do? They'll have to do a merciless pruning of the cohort of applications received. So yeah, it is a tough game, but try and get feedback from the funding agency, and if it's not possible, talk to senior researchers.
Great, thank you. And with a growing demand for open access publication, how does one get funding for research publications, to cover the APC charges? Can you like apply a grant separately or anything to cover for, or earmark funds for APC coverage?
Yeah, I think if the scheme does not explicitly disallow it, it's a good idea to already budget it during the when you put together the budget. Maybe under miscellaneous or publication charges. I don't think any funding agency explicitly disallows you to do that. What many applicants fail to do is that they fail to think about these requirements at the early stages of the proposal. Then they realize later on that they should have set aside some amount for publication charges. So of course, yesterday you were also talking about getting publication waivers, publication fee waivers, and so on. So if that is not possible, try and see if it can be budgeted within the grant where you put it together. There are some funding agencies like India Alliance, for example. They allow you to take what they call the flexible funding allowance, which is a contingency grant. They let you use that for article processing charges. They also pay you for open access charges over and above what your grant is. So towards the end of the grant, if you can show to them that you've spent a lot for open access charges, they would give you supplementary funds to match that difference.
Great. Thank you. I hope that answers your question. So I think we can move on to the next.
One question caught my eye. I just thought I would answer that, which says, what do you mean by hybrid study design and how is it a grant killer? Would combining computation and wet lab be considered hybrid? I'm sorry if what I said was confusing. When I said hybrid grant study design, I didn't mean combination of computation and wet lab. I was saying for a particular problem, you take two versions of the same approach and you try to combine them. For example, let's say you're doing a public health cohort study and you're trying to incorporate some aspects of a cross-sectional study and some aspects of a longitudinal study. You can take only one of these two approaches, right? You cannot combine them saying that I'm creating a hybrid study design. That's what I meant. Approaches that are complementary to each other, very well and good, you can take them. But if there is one clearly defined approach that is possible for a particular problem, don't try and complicate it with hybrid study designs. Yeah. All right. Should we move ahead, Madhurima? I'll try and be quick.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay. So CV and background, this is also an important part of the proposal because this is where the reviewer tries to understand what your accomplishments have been. So you have to highlight your academic and professional accomplishments that are relevant for the proposal if possible. It's not a good idea to talk about your high school debate competition, Rangoli competition and all that. Just talk about your professional accomplishments, which will add value to your current proposal. And normally they would also give you a format. They would also say that, highlight your 5 major publications in this area, the 5 major awards you have won. If they're asking you to give 5, or if they say only in the last 5 years, whatever you have done, please put that. Please follow these guidelines. And apart from the CV tables where you give your employment history, your educational background, sometimes they also ask you for an essay. They ask you for a statement of purpose, right? They ask you to describe your scientific career to date. Here is where there's an opportunity to interface with the reviewer. They get to know about you as a person, because everywhere else it's just your ideas. Here they get to know about you as a person, as what you hold high in your mind as a researcher. So try and use an honest and personal narrative to present yourself as a capable, forward-thinking and knowledgeable researcher. Again, this doesn't mean you have to go and make it sound like your blog, but make your scientific career to date description in such a way that they get to understand what you hold as your morals and values as far as scientific research goes. make clear and evidence-based statements. Don't try and don't try and give very ambiguous generic statements. If there are some accomplishments that you want to highlight, and if there are some numbers to support that, for example, you want to talk about your mentoring experience, instead of just saying I have extensive mentoring experience, you can try and qualify that sentence by saying, during my PhD, I had the opportunity to train so many MSc students and so many BTech students, and so something like that. Wherever there is, you can support your claims with numbers, please do that. But please don't cook up anything, just make it clear and evidence-based. And then your listing publications, of course, this is a very important part of your CV. It's going to be the first thing that reviewers see, but it's not the only thing that they see. It's an important part. Here, give a clear and up-to-date list of your publications. Do not change the order of authors. If you're an equally contributing first author, but in the published version of your manuscript, your name appears second, while you put it in the CV, also put it in the same way. Okay, do not change the orders of authors, and follow a consistent style for the entire list of publications. Now, sometimes what people do is they copy paste the publication list from their CV, which is 6 months old. Now, between that time and now, the publication citation itself would have changed. You know, the finally accepted version, which is appearing online, might have a slightly different title, might have 1 or 2 additional authors, and so on. So make sure that you are giving them the most up-to-date version of your citation and in a consistent style. Very quickly about budget. Budget is an integral part of the research proposal, and it's the slightly scary part for many people who are putting together their first grant. But my suggestion is that do not get scared of numbers. You're the one who is on the driver's seat, and you know your research proposal quite well, and you know the requirements quite well. So it's only a matter of time till you get used to the numbers and you're able to put together a good, a competitive budget. Just a few points on what are the most important do's of a budget. Just think big and be ambitious, right? If it's going to be a first or second grant, you're probably not aware of what to include, what not to include. Have I forgotten this? Have I forgotten that? Will my experiment require this? Will my experiment require that? One advice that some experts give is that visualize or imagine that the grant has been awarded to you, and how is your first day at work going to look like, or how is your first week at work after you get that grant going to look like? What are the different things you're going to be doing? What are the different kind of stakeholders you're going to be interacting? What are the different administrative steps you're going to be doing? When you visualize that, the first day after winning a grant, it will help you really not miss any of the requirements of what should go into the budget. It is absolutely important that budgetary requires must be commensurate with the proposal's requirements, not less, not more. If your proposal requires a certain set of chemicals, a certain set of strains, a certain set of computational power, please add those in the budget, but do not inflate your budget. Don't think of this as an opportunity to utilize whatever the scheme provides. Let's say the scheme provides 1.5 crores, but all the requirements of your project can be met adequately with 80 lakhs. Do not inflate it to 1.5 crores just so you want to touch the cap. At the same time, do not do the reverse as well. Don't be too modest. Think of backup avenues. Think of scenarios where things can go wrong. Think of other alternative approaches you might have to take and how much they would cost. And support the requests with strong and valid scientific justification. Funding agencies always ask for scientific justification. They want to know that you've thought about the requirements and you're not just throwing out arbitrary numbers in your budget. So they do not stress on cost justification. For example, let's say you're doing a genomics project. You do not have to explain to them that each genomics run will cost this much, and that's why I have put this much. It's okay to say that, but what they're more interested is the scientific justification rather than the cost justification, where you explain how having that resource is important for a particular aim or sub-aim of your work. So always support your request with strong justification. And pay attention to the costing policies of the funder. They will definitely have clearly defined policies with respect to the maximum limit of the budget, which is called the budgetary cap. Personal support provisions. Is the scheme going to pay your salary, or is it going to pay the salary of support staff members like research assistants? And if they will allow overheads. Institutional overheads are normally set at 10 to 15% of the budget. This is for the institution to help you with the administration of the grant. They are providing you with they typically provide you with space, electricity, water, basic resources, right? So you will have to budget a certain fraction of your budget for institutional overheads. Some funding agencies give you guidelines about what the maximum level of budget overheads has to be. Some don't. Some set it as low as 3%, or it can be as high as 20%. If they don't cite an overheads percentage, a normal recommendation is to go with 10% or 12%. Okay. As much as you pay attention to what is allowed by the budget, it is also important to think about disallowed costs. Some funding agencies will have clearly defined policies on what is not allowed. So be careful that you don't request such costs. This can be, for example, radiation costs or shipping costs or things like that. They would expect you to meet these through other sources like institutional support. If they're going to disallow you, it is for a particular reason that they have that policy. Do not try and challenge that policy. Do not try and fake ignorance about the policy. Be absolutely mindful about that policy and try to adhere to those. Even after these pointers, I'm sure it's going to be difficult to come up with the first set of numbers. So please consult senior researchers, research managers in your institute, if there's a team available, finance officers or grants advisors at the funding agency who might be able to help you with costs. Now, let's take one very quick look at this budget, an example budget, and see if it looks okay. So it has non-recurring costs, which is equipment spread across 3 years. And then on the recurring costs, it asks for some consumables and travel allowances, contingency, and then manpower. And there's also one line of justification provided for the equipment. Can somebody say what is wrong or right about this budget? Just 15 seconds. Repetitions and consumables, same amount for 3 years. Equipment grant should be higher in the beginning and then taper. Majority equipment should go in first year. No justification. Yeah. So these are all brilliant answers. I think all these are valid, mistakes with this budget. You cannot, in year 3 of the budget, you cannot purchase equipment worth 20 lakhs. And it's equally divided across the 3 years. It just goes to show that this applicant has not thought about what the equipments are and why. And he also mentions in the justification that some of the equipments will be purchased as per the requirements for laboratory as studies will progress. This is unacceptable. One is expected to have this in mind or think about this during the application stage itself. And consumables also, they've put 5 lakhs per year. Although this is not a big mistake, but it's very difficult to believe that you will require exactly 5 lakhs each year for your consumables. This again shows that you wanted to fit 15 lakhs, but you just spread it across equally in 3 years. Contingency also that same way. I think they put 10 lakhs, again, without any justification, and overheads has not been added at all. So these are some shortcomings of this budget. Of course, this will, the concepts would be similar when you work on yours, but the specifics might be different. Thank you. Thank you so much for those answers, everyone. Somebody in the chat also wanted to know about support letters and what letters are expected to convey. One mistake that many Indian students, Indian researchers do is that they don't take supporting letters seriously. They think it's just an administrative requirement. It's a checkbox requirement, and they don't give enough importance to it. It's actually not the case. Supporting letters are looked at very seriously by reviewers, especially if it's an international reviewer. They're going to take each word mentioned in the letter very, very seriously. And I wouldn't say a supporting letter would make a weak research proposal fundable, but it is what makes a good proposal to a great proposal. A nicely written supporting letter can, push the proposal in favor of funding. So if your proposal is going to be at the fence, whether it's going to get funded or not, reviewers and committees would pay a little extra attention to supporting letters to see if it is going to rescue your proposal. So what do we need to know about support letters? You should know whom to ask. Also equally important is whom not to ask. If you know for a fact that somebody is not going to give you a good recommendation and it's not going to help your candidature, it's better not to ask them. But whoever you ask, you keep them in the know. Don't let them receive an email from the funding agency as a surprise. They should hear it from you rather than from the funding agency that they've been added as a referee or as a mentor or a collaborator and so on. And it's also likely that they're going to ask you to write the first draft, which I personally feel is not a healthy practice, but it happens because senior researchers are very busy. They would request you to write the first draft of the letter, which they would later add or edit, add or delete, and then submit the final version. So even if whether they do it or not, it is a good idea to clearly indicate to them to focus on three different points, three main points. One is why the applicant or team of applicants is an excellent choice. So they talk about your competitiveness as a researcher. Then talk about the importance of the proposed work on a global and local scale and the relevance of the work. And then how they propose to support the applicant. Do they have a direct role as a co-investigator or a collaborator, or they're just a referee who is giving a letter of recommendation, or they're going to be a mentor? If they're going to be a mentor, how? So if they write one paragraph each for each of these points, why the person is good, why the proposal is good, and what would be their contribution, I think that would make for a good support letter. And also with letters, there would be clearly defined specifications or formats that the funding agency would prescribe. For example, that the letter should be on the letterhead, it should bear a date and a signature, it should be sent from an official email address and so on. So you will have to follow these prescriptions for your letters to be taken seriously. The last thing one should actually do is to have a very weak letter, which is just a two-liner saying, yes, I recommend this person for the grant, or yes, I am happy to collaborate with this person. Please request your collaborators or your referees to make an effort to provide an elaborate letter and also give specific examples of the strengths of your proposal, the strengths of your candidature. If there are some anecdotes that they can cite to show that you've shown potential for research independence, for example. There are some anecdotes to show that your preliminary work has already been well appreciated by the university or the department. There are certain specific incidents which will boost up your candidature, the strength of your candidature. It would be a good idea to add these because that would make your letter stand apart from the other letters, which might otherwise be very generic and boring. So apart from this, there also could be other sections in grants. Some grants might have, some might not. For example, public engagement plans. How do you plan to engage with the lay public to convey the importance of your work or to generate awareness about science and research in general? This is still not become a mandatory portion in many grants, but agencies like DST are making it important that people look at SSR, scientific social responsibility, similar to corporate social responsibility, where a significant period of your work time will have to be devoted to public engagement and outreach funds. So please do give it a thought and make a genuine effort to contribute to these areas because it's only going to help your research in the long run. How public engagement is going to help your research in the long run, it's the topic of another webinar, but I'm sure there are adequate resources out there to inform you about this topic. Data management and sharing, especially if there's going to be a lot of computational data, genomic data, transcriptomic data, for example. They might ask this as a separate question in the application form itself, or they might want to know about this after your grant gets funded. How are you going to be managing, storing, curating the data, and sharing the data among the research team and also with the scientific community overall? So it could be, even simple plans like how you plan to store it on your local computer, how frequently you will take backups, what kind of servers these will be stored in, are you going to be using cloud technology to have a backup? Things like this will also add to the assurance, the reassurance of the reviewers that their data is safe. These approvals and other clearances, normally these are not asked for in the application stage. People only want copies of the approvals if your proposal gets funded and before you start doing your work. But even in the application, they might be curious to know if you thought about these things. So if there are any arrangements in place for you to fast track and get your ethics approvals, to get your experiments going as soon as the funding comes, you can mention these in relevant sections of your application. Outcomes and impact. This can be part of the research proposal itself, or it can be a standalone section where they ask you to list down what the expected outcomes are, what the associated milestones are, and what the impact is going to be. Some funding agencies even ask you to describe short-term, medium-term, mid-term, and long-term impact. So here, one has to be very careful not to make sweeping conclusions or very high-sounding claims. Be practical, be honest and realistic, but with the adequate level of clarity, project the outcomes and expected impact. Almost at the end of my presentation, apart from whatever we have talked so far, there are also some additional tips one can consider to make your proposal slightly more competitive. One is gender equality measures. Now, gender equality is something that funding agencies are paying a lot of attention to, and they're making proactive efforts to ensure. So if through your proposal, for example, in the hiring of your research staff, or in the hiring or in the recruitment of study participants, if you can bring in gender equality measures, please try and add these in the proposal. About contingency backup plans, this shows preparedness, and it also prevents a situation where a reviewer points out loopholes in your study design. So always be openness to be open to alternative possibilities. If you say that, I'm proposing to do this, but it is also possible that it will go wrong because of these reasons. And if it goes wrong because of these reasons, these are the backup approaches. What it shows to the reviewer is that you're well-read, you're thorough with your field, and you've thought about different scenarios, and you're honest in your approach as well. So it's always better for you to present these alternative possibilities rather than the reviewer to point these out as possible weaknesses of your proposal. Interdisciplinarity. If it is possible to bring an interdisciplinary approach to your proposal, and if your proposal demands that, please try and do that. I think ultimately the underlying, if you have to take away just one message from today's presentation, I think the key word is clarity. What reviewers and committee members are looking for is really clarity of thought, clarity in your plans. They want to make sure you're clear and consistent in the different claims you make about literature background or what you're planning to do, and the requests you make in terms of human resource or budgetary resources. So clarity and consistency will be key. Whatever you say in one section should resonate completely with what you say in another section of your grant. You cannot, for example, say in your proposal that you're going to be doing 250 human participant study, but whereas you're not budgeting for that enough. So this is just one simple example. So please make sure all different sections of your proposal are consistent and you're presenting them to the reviewer with absolute clarity. Despite all this, there is invariably going to be rejection. I think the best of researchers have faced rejection. This is a tweet by Arden, Nobel laureate, who received another disappointing NIH grant rejection after his Nobel Prize was awarded. So this just goes on to show that even the best of researchers face rejection in one form or the other because the competition is such. But please know that you're not alone. Everybody faces rejection in one way or the other. Give yourself time. Give yourself time to understand what could have been possible reasons for your rejection. Just the weakness of your candidature is not always the single factor behind rejection. There could be multiple factors beyond your control as well. So be kind to yourself, give yourself time to recover from rejection, share your setback. As much as you show interest to share your success stories, also share your setback with peers and colleagues. This would, I think, build to a culture where people are celebrating each other's successes and learning from each other's failures and not taking them too hardly. And look for ways to improve and get feedback from whatever source is possible, from the funding agency, from the reviewers, from mentors, senior colleagues, and peers. So feedback is going to really help you fly high. So I'll probably stop here. Wish you all good luck with your grants, fellowship applications, and happy to take any further questions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Madan. I think that was a very insightful presentation. We have a lot of great words for you. And unfortunately, in the interest of time, we will have to, wrap up the session now. But I'm sure Madan will be available to answer some of these questions. I think a lot of participants can reach out to you directly, or there's a survey form that we will also be sending across. If there are questions that you want us to send across to Madan, we would be happy to do so. I see a lot of questions around supporting letters and rejections, etc. But thank you again for this very insightful session. So as we draw this captivating webinar to a close, let me express my heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of you, for being a part of this workshop. I'm confident that through Madan's session today, you'll leave armed with insights, strategies, and inspiration. Thank you for your active engagement, thoughtful questions, and valuable contributions. And I wish you all continued success on your research journey. So we hope to see you again tomorrow for the final module of this series, a session on scientific communication and outreach, an essential step in your research career. So you've heard now about grant writing, project funding, as well as manuscript writing. So the last step for you would be, once you have your research ready, how do you amplify the impact of your research through SciComm, through outreach? So we will look forward to welcoming you again tomorrow. And the recording of this session would be sent to all the participants here, as well as the registrants who couldn't attend the session live. So with that, I would like to close this session. Thanks again, Madan, for being with us here. We really appreciate your
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.